You promised you'd take me there again someday, but you never did.
It's been over 10 years since the last mainline Silent Hill release, and now after all the speculation we finally got a game worthy of the Silent Hill name.
Waiting for you.
Or did we? Silent Hill 2 Remake has been such a divisive title ever since its announcement back in 2022, with people giving polar opposite opinions on whether it was the best thing ever since the invention of sliced bread, or the absolute worst thing on earth, tampering the legacy of the original. We live in a time when things are either overhyped to the point when there is next to no possibility for the project to succeed, or criticized into oblivion before it even gets a chance to prove everyone wrong. The case of the Silent Hill 2 Remake is an absolute anomaly in our bizarre world of extremes, when despite a marketing campaign that can be best called as questionable, and an interesting choice of the development team responsible for the creation of the remake, it turned out to be an exceptional game.
Think I'd look good in this one?
I understand the general skepticism towards Bloober Team. After all, they're not particularly well known for their flawless track record, with most of their recent games best described as solid 6 or 7 out of 10 titles. Yet Konami entrusted them with the task of recreating one of the most influential and complex games, not only in the Silent Hill franchise, but perhaps the entire gaming industry. On paper, remaking something should be a straightforward and somewhat simple task. You don't have to write a whole new story, the main gameplay loop is set, the key sequences and cutscenes were already made, and all you have to do is successfully recreate them with modern sensibilities. On paper is the key part in my previous statement. When dealing with a beloved franchise that has been dormant for so many years, and one of the key titles no less, it is so easy to get something wrong and end up creating a poor excuse for a re-release. Funnily enough, Silent Hill has already faced this fate with the appalling HD collection, so of course people would be skeptical after everything that Konami put their own franchise through. Thankfully, not only does the Silent Hill 2 remake hit the same beats as the original, but it also makes enough changes for things to feel fresh and interesting, even for the veterans of the series. The remake is definitely not a case of this is how I remember things from way back when, as not only does it expand most of the locations from the original by allowing us to enter places that were unavailable before, but also reroutes James' journey and adds new puzzles that must be solved in order to progress. I'm glad that the guys at Bloober Team didn't just give the original a Resident Evil remake treatment by changing the camera perspective and making the game look prettier with modern visual effects. Though, I gotta give credit where it's due, the remake looks fantastic on the Unreal Engine 5. The original had this grey movie grain filter aesthetic that worked perfectly well considering all of the dilapidated buildings and underground passages we have to go through. Even though the remake does allow itself some liberties with the visuals, like adding sunlight at one point in the game, it still respects the original vision and enhances many locations, making them even more unsettling than ever before. The developers managed to capture the depressing, terrifying atmosphere of the original, once again taking us on a journey through the mind of James Sunderland as he descends further and further into darkness, revealing the horrible thing he has done, which led him to the town of Silent Hill. By this point, I think most people know the basic premise of Silent Hill 2. James Sunderland goes to this small, quiet town after receiving a letter from his wife, who allegedly died 3 years ago, to find their special place in Silent Hill. Throughout the story, the game constantly plays with our mind, giving us hints and clues to what actually happened, and why James sees and goes through so many horrors on his way to the Lakeview Hotel. Every cutscene, every sequence and key event are present in the remake. Some are left exactly as they were in the original, while others have received a major overhaul, making them more memorable. This mostly applies to the boss fights and the absolute fever trip that they take us through, and I actually like these changes as they provide more context and help us to understand the inner struggles and psyche of characters like Angela and Eddie, who not only get more lines of dialogue than in the original, but are generally more defined as characters.
You and me are the same. We're not like other people, don't you know that?
Sure, the game does have its flaws like very stiff controls, and I know that this would sound strange considering that the original had fixed camera angles and tank controls with the option to switch to a more fluent movement option with 2D controls, but the old Silent Hill 2 still felt a lot more fast-paced and avoiding fights was always a viable option. In the remake, however, if you see an enemy, chances are you're gonna have to fight it. This happens for a number of reasons. Like the controls that feel painfully slow and sluggish, from aiming to simple movement, everything seems to have a delay when performing an action. I get that this was done intentionally as James is not a trained Spec Ops veteran, but navigating and especially engaging in combat can be a very frustrating experience due to how sluggish his movement is. And that's coming from a person who played the remake on PC with a mouse and keyboard. Or the areas that have become more open thanks to the technical capabilities of the new engine and hardware that runs it, which reduces the number of loads and renders the locations entirely, as opposed to loading up each room individually like it was in the original. And the devs clearly knew that, as the amount of health and ammo pickups has at least doubled when compared to the original. At the beginning I did my best to conserve my ammo and avoid fights at all costs, as I remembered how scarce the items were in the original game. But in the remake there are way more situations when engaging in combat is unavoidable, and using a 2x4 or a steel pipe just won't cut it. So inevitably the game became more action oriented, with some sections forcing me to spend my resources on dispatching enemies if I wanted to progress. I'm not saying that this is a bad thing by any means, but it definitely makes the remake stray further away from the original. Another thing that only the veterans of the series will notice is how more straightforward Silent Hill 2 Remake is when compared to the original game. Even though most of the areas are more interactable and accessible, the game does seem to hold the player's hand way more than the original ever did. The navigation has improved with clear indications of where you need to go and what you need to do. In my mind this is a good thing, as it helps the narrative to be more consistent without frustrating the player with poor level design. There's plenty of going around in circles and backtracking as it is, so it's great to see the game evolving and not punishing people for not knowing where to go from the very beginning. The remake is far more accessible when compared to the original, even if it comes at the cost of subtlety that the series is known for. Despite this, Silent Hill 2 Remake hasn't lost its identity and doesn't feel like a Silent Hill mod or Resident Evil 2 Remake. All of the visual and sound cues that were so impactful and unsettling in the original have been enhanced and really come to life in the most distressing moments, delivering an experience that is on par with the PS2 era classic. Sometimes remakes tend to overwrite way too many things, turning into something completely different from the original. Whether this is a good or a bad thing entirely depends on the execution and people's preferences. What I cannot deny is that the Resident Evil 2 Remake is an excellent game that can be enjoyed by both the veterans of the series and newcomers alike. Sure, it's not a 1-to-1 frame perfect recreation of the original and takes liberties with the source material, but to be honest that's a good thing. Believer Team really did a fine job at retaining the core ideas of the original game, while adding new content without hindering the story.
You were always so forgetful. Remember that time in the hotel?
As the remake was approaching its release, I read so many community threads where people were almost begging others not to buy this game for so many ridiculous reasons. Oh, they've ruined the atmosphere, why is it so colorful? Did you see what they've done to the character models? Angel looks terrible. This is nothing like the original game. And so on.
Aren't you Maria?
I'm not your Mary.
So you are Maria.
I am. If you want me to be.
As someone who has recently played the original Silent Hill 2 on a proper old-school PS2 setup, I honestly don't understand what all the fuss is about. Yes, the remake does not look like a 20-year-old game. What a surprise, right? Yes, the models are different. Yes, the path that James takes is not exactly the same as the original. But are these issues really so important that it could stop someone from enjoying the game? Turns out they're not. Just one glance at the Silent Hill 2 Remake page tells you all you need to know about how players feel about the new release. I think the Silent Hill 2 Remake is a great comeback title for Konami that could well be the first step towards reviving the sleeping giant that is the Silent Hill franchise. If this is Konami's way of testing the waters to see if there is enough interest from the audience, then I'm more than optimistic for the future of the series, with a new entry somewhere around the corner.
Disgust you. I'm so sorry.